What happens when a devoted wife, dismissed as useless, decides to reclaim her identity and take control of her life after years of sacrifice? I arrived at Robert's lavish company party, my heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and pride. This was supposed to be our night, a celebration of his hard work and success. As I stepped into the grand ballroom, the glimmer of crystal chandeliers reflected off the polished marble floors, creating an atmosphere of opulence that felt almost surreal. I smoothed my emerald silk dress, the one Robert had chosen for me just last week, and took a deep breath, ready to embrace the evening. But as I mingled through the crowd, I began to notice the whispers. At first, they were just background noise, a faint hum beneath the clinking of glasses and laughter. Yet, as I approached a group of Robert's colleagues, their conversations abruptly halted, and I felt the weight of their gazes. I caught snippets of hushed remarks. Words like frigid and unsatisfied floated through the air, piercing my heart like daggers. My stomach twisted in knots as I realized they were talking about me. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the unease that settled over me. After all, I had been the supportive wife for 15 years, the one who had stood by Robert through thick and thin. I had hosted client dinners, reviewed contracts late into the night, and celebrated every milestone with him. Yet, in this moment, I felt like a ghost, invisible and dismissed. The laughter around me felt hollow, and I could sense the pity in their eyes. As I continued to navigate the crowd, I spotted Robert near the stage, surrounded by a group of executives. He looked magnificent in his custom-tailored tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled, exuding the confidence that had first drawn me to him. I wanted nothing more than to join him, to share in his triumph, but as I approached, something strange happened. The circle of men seemed to close ranks, their backs turning slightly toward me as if forming a barrier. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Robert," I called softly, touching his elbow. He turned, and for a split second, I saw something flash across his face, not joy or love, but annoyance. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it stung nonetheless. "Oh, Margaret, you're here," he said, his tone flat and dismissive. No kiss, no arm around my waist, no introduction to the foreign investors he had been courting for months. I laughed, trying to keep things light. "This is our big night, remember?" But before I could say more, he was already scanning the room for his next conversation, leaving me standing there like a discarded prop. The rejection burned, but worse was the growing realization that people were watching, whispering, judging. I turned slowly, my face burning with humiliation, and that's when I heard it. "There's the frigid wife who can't satisfy him." The words were spoken just loudly enough to ensure I'd hear, and I felt my heart drop. I glanced around, desperate to identify the speaker among the sea of faces, but all I saw were smiles that seemed forced, almost pitying. My hands began to shake as pieces of a puzzle I had refused to see started falling into place. The late meetings, the business trips I was suddenly excluded from, the way Robert's face lit up when his phone buzzed with what he claimed were urgent work messages. And then, there she was, Vanessa, Robert's new assistant, materializing beside me in a scarlet dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Hello, Vanessa," I managed, my voice barely steady. She leaned in close, her perfume sickeningly sweet. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about tonight. This party is really for business associates and key stakeholders only." I felt the ground shift beneath me, and in that moment, I realized everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and my future had just shattered like crystal hitting marble. As Vanessa's words hung in the air, I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. The laughter and chatter of the party faded into a dull roar, and all I could focus on was the sharpness of her smile and the way she stood so confidently beside Robert. I had spent years building a life with him, yet here I was, being dismissed by the very woman who had stepped into my shoes without a second thought. My heart raced, and I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks as I struggled to maintain my composure. "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. "I am a key stakeholder in this company. I own 17% of Sterling Enterprises." The words felt foreign on my tongue, a reminder of the sacrifices I had made for Robert's success. But Vanessa merely tilted her head, her expression a mix of mock sympathy and amusement. "Had," she corrected, her tone dripping with condescension. Past tense, darling. Robert's been meaning to discuss some recent changes with you. Before I could process her words, 2 security guards appeared at my elbows, their expressions unreadable. The same men who had smiled and nodded at me countless times before now looked through me as if I were invisible. "Security, remove this useless woman," Vanessa announced, her voice carrying across the nearby conversations. The ballroom fell silent, and every eye turned toward us, witnessing my public humiliation. I looked desperately toward Robert, but he turned his back, engaged in what appeared to be a fascinating discussion about quarterly projections with a group of investors. The guards gently but firmly escorted me toward the exit, and with each step, I felt the weight of my life crashing down around me. I had been the woman behind Robert's success, the silent partner who had sacrificed so much for his dreams. And now, I was being thrown out like yesterday's news. The hotel's revolving door spun behind me with a finality that echoed through my bones, and I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life had just shattered. Once outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap in the face, and I took a moment to collect myself. I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding in my chest. I had always been the supportive wife, the one who cheered him on from the sidelines, but now I felt like a fool. The knot in my stomach tightened as I recalled the whispers, the pitying glances, and the way Robert had dismissed me. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through my contacts. I hesitated over Robert's name, the man I had loved for over 2 decades. But the thought of calling him felt like admitting defeat. Instead, I dialed David Chin, my financial advisor. "David, I need you to execute some transactions first thing Monday morning," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me. "I want to liquidate my stake in Sterling Enterprises. All $17 million worth." "Margaret, that's a massive decision," he replied, concern lacing his tone. "Maybe we should schedule a meeting next week to discuss." "No," I interrupted, my resolve hardening. "I want to freeze all joint accounts and credit cards. Everything connected to Robert gets shut down immediately." The words felt liberating, a declaration of my intent to reclaim my life. As I hung up, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I was done being the invisible woman. I was done being the supportive wife who faded into the background. I would take control of my narrative, and I would not let Robert or Vanessa dictate my worth any longer. With each step away from the hotel, I felt lighter, as if I were shedding the weight of my past. I had been humiliated, yes, but I was also awakening to a new reality. I was ready to fight for my identity, to reclaim the power I had allowed others to take from me. The night was just beginning, and I was determined to make it mine. As I drove away from the hotel, the city lights blurred into streaks of color, mirroring the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. I was no longer just Margaret Sterling, the supportive wife. I was a woman on the brink of reclaiming her identity. The confrontation with Vanessa and the humiliation I had faced ignited a fire within me, one that I had long suppressed. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, pushing me to take decisive action. I parked my Tesla in the driveway of our sprawling home, the place that had once felt like a sanctuary but now seemed like a gilded cage. The silence inside was deafening, amplifying the chaos in my mind. I walked to my home office, the mahogany desk where I had spent countless nights reviewing contracts and planning Robert's business strategies. It was time to turn that desk into a command center for my own future. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen, my heart racing as I contemplated the steps I needed to take. I had spent years building Robert's empire, but now it was time to build my own. I pulled up my financial records, the meticulously organized documents that detailed my contributions to Sterling Enterprises. Each page told a story of sacrifice, of late nights spent working while Robert chased his dreams. I had been the silent partner, but no more. With my fingers hovering over the keyboard, I began drafting an email to David Chin. "I need you to execute some transactions first thing Monday morning," I typed, my resolve solidifying with each keystroke. "I want to liquidate my stake in Sterling Enterprises, all $17 million worth." The words felt powerful, a declaration of my intent to break free from the chains of my past. As I hit send, a wave of relief washed over me. I was taking control of my life, and it felt exhilarating. But I knew I couldn't stop there. I needed to sever all ties with Robert, to ensure that he could no longer dictate my worth or my future. I scrolled through my contacts again, my finger hovering over Robert's name. The thought of calling him made my stomach churn, but I knew I had to do it. "David," I said when he answered, my voice steady. "I also need you to freeze all joint accounts and credit cards. Everything connected to Robert gets shut down immediately." The finality of my words hung in the air, and I could almost hear the gears turning in David's mind. "Margaret, are you sure about this?" he asked, concern lacing his tone. "This is a massive decision." "I'm sure," I replied, my voice firm. "I've spent too long being the woman behind the scenes. It's time for me to step into the light." After hanging up, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. I was no longer just a supporting character in Robert's story. I was the author of my own narrative. I began to envision what my life could look like without him, pursuing my passions, rediscovering who I was outside of being Mrs. Sterling. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I decided to enroll in a photography class, something I had always wanted to do but had put on hold for Robert's career. I reached out to a local community college and signed up for a course that started next week. The thought of picking up a camera again filled me with excitement, a spark of creativity that had long been dormant. As I moved through the day, I felt lighter, as if I were shedding the weight of my past. I began to plan my future, mapping out the steps I would take to reclaim my identity. I would not only liquidate my stake in Sterling Enterprises, but also invest in myself. I was ready to embrace the unknown, to step into a world where I could define my own success. With each decision I made, I felt the chains of my past loosening. I was no longer just a woman scorned. I was a force to be reckoned with. The confrontation had ignited a fire within me, and I was determined to fan those flames into a blaze of empowerment. I was ready to reclaim my life, and nothing would stand in my way. The days following my decision felt like a whirlwind of activity and anticipation. I had liquidated my stake in Sterling Enterprises, frozen all joint accounts, and enrolled in a photography class. Each step I took felt like a small victory, but the real turning point was looming on the horizon. I had called an emergency board meeting, and I knew that facing Robert and the board would be the ultimate test of my newfound resolve. As I walked into the boardroom, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. The long, polished table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. But instead of feeling intimidated, I felt empowered. This was my moment to reclaim my narrative, to assert my place in a company I had helped build. The board members filed in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. I recognized many of them, men I had known for years, who had always treated me as an extension of Robert rather than as an equal. As they took their seats, I could sense the tension in the room. They were waiting for Robert to arrive, and I could almost hear the unspoken questions. What was Margaret doing here? What did she want? When Robert finally entered, he looked disheveled, his usually immaculate appearance marred by dark circles under his eyes. He glanced at me, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by annoyance. "What's this about, Margaret?" he asked, his tone sharp. "I thought we agreed to handle this privately." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "No, Robert. This is about transparency and accountability. I'm here to discuss my contributions to Sterling Enterprises and to assert my rights as a co-founder." The words felt powerful as they left my lips, and I could see the board members shift in their seats, intrigued. "Let's not play games," Robert said, his voice rising slightly. "You're not a part of this company anymore. You've sold your shares." "Not yet," I countered, my voice steady. "I still hold a significant stake, and I intend to use my position to ensure that my contributions are recognized." I pulled out a stack of documents, meticulously organized, and placed them on the table. "These are the financial records that detail my investments and contributions over the years." The room fell silent as I began to present my case. I highlighted the incorporation papers from 1998, showing my name listed as co-founder and primary investor. I could see Robert's expression shift from annoyance to disbelief as I laid out the facts. "You've built your empire on my sacrifices, Robert. I mortgaged my inheritance to fund your first office lease. I signed as guarantor for loans that put my personal assets on the line. I deserve recognition for my role in this company." As I spoke, I could feel the energy in the room change. The board members, who had once looked at me with pity or disdain, were now leaning in, listening intently. I continued to present evidence of my contributions, client referrals, strategic guidance, and the countless hours I had spent working behind the scenes. Each document I presented was a testament to my dedication and hard work. Robert's face paled as the weight of my words sank in. "This is absurd," he finally said, his voice shaky. "You're trying to destroy everything we've built because of a personal vendetta." "This isn't revenge, Robert," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "This is about reclaiming my identity and ensuring that my contributions are acknowledged. I will not be erased from the narrative of Sterling Enterprises." The tension in the room was palpable, and I could see the board members exchanging glances, weighing their options. I knew I had them on my side, and I pressed on. "If you want to move forward as a company, you need to recognize the contributions of everyone involved, including me. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm demanding what I rightfully deserve." As I finished my presentation, I could feel a sense of triumph swelling within me. I had stood my ground, faced my fears, and asserted my worth. The board members began to murmur among themselves, and I could see the gears turning in their minds. They were realizing that I was not just Robert's wife, I was a formidable force in my own right. Robert, visibly shaken, attempted to regain control of the room. "We need to discuss the future of the company," he said, trying to redirect the conversation. But I could see the cracks in his facade. The board was no longer looking at him with the same reverence they once had. "Let's discuss the future, then," I said, my voice steady. "But it must include a restructuring that acknowledges all contributions, including mine. If you want to avoid a crisis, you need to take this seriously." As the meeting continued, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. I had turned the tide, and I was no longer the woman who had been dismissed and humiliated. I was Margaret Hartford, a co-founder of Sterling Enterprises, and I was ready to reclaim my place in the narrative. The boardroom showdown had become my turning point, and I was determined to see it through. The boardroom meeting had shifted the balance of power, but I knew that my journey was far from over. As I left the conference room, the weight of my confrontation with Robert lingered in the air, a palpable tension that signaled a turning point in my life. I had asserted my worth, but now it was time to take the final step in reclaiming my identity, filing for divorce. The drive home felt surreal. The city whizzed by in a blur, but my mind was focused on the task ahead. I had spent years supporting Robert, sacrificing my own dreams for his ambitions. Now, I was ready to break free from the chains that had bound me for so long. I parked my Tesla in the driveway, the familiar surroundings feeling both comforting and suffocating. Inside, the silence was deafening. I walked to my home office, the place where I had spent countless hours working on Robert's business, and pulled out the manila folder I had prepared weeks ago. The divorce papers sat crisp and clean, each line representing a door closing and another opening. My heart raced as I opened the folder, the reality of what I was about to do settling in. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. This was it. I was no longer just Margaret Sterling. I was reclaiming my maiden name, Margaret Hartford. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling slightly as I signed my name on the first line. Each signature felt like a release, a shedding of the past that had weighed me down for too long. As I signed the final page, a sense of relief washed over me. I was taking control of my life, and it felt exhilarating. I had spent too long being defined by my relationship with Robert, and now I was ready to define myself. I sealed the envelope, the sound of the flap closing echoing in the quiet room. This was my declaration of independence, a statement that I would no longer be a footnote in someone else's story. With the envelope in hand, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I was ready to face Robert, to confront him with the reality of our situation. I dialed his number, my heart pounding as I waited for him to pick up. When he answered, his voice was laced with irritation. "What is it, Margaret?" "I'm busy. I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Can you meet me at home?" "Fine," he replied, his tone dismissive. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I waited for him to arrive, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the confrontation that would solidify my decision to break free. When Robert walked through the door, he looked as if he had just come from a battle, disheveled and on edge. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes narrowing as he took in the envelope in my hand. I took a deep breath, my heart racing. I'm filing for divorce, Robert. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. He stared at me, disbelief etched across his face. You can't be serious. After everything we've built together. I'm very serious, I replied, my voice firm. I've spent years supporting your dreams while sacrificing my own. I deserve to be recognized for my contributions, and I deserve to live my life on my own terms. Robert's expression shifted from disbelief to anger. You're making a huge mistake, Margaret. You'll regret this. No, I won't, I said, my resolve hardening. I've finally found my voice, and I'm not going to let you silence me anymore. This isn't just about the divorce, it's about reclaiming my identity. He stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. You think you can just walk away from everything? You'll lose everything we've built together. I held my ground, refusing to let his intimidation tactics work. What we built together was built on my sacrifices. I'm not walking away. I'm taking back what's mine. I'm ready to start a new chapter, one where I'm in control of my own life. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could see the realization dawning on Robert. He was losing control, and it terrified him. You'll never win this, he spat, his voice filled with venom. Maybe not in the way you think, I replied, my voice steady. But I will win my freedom, and that's all that matters to me now. With that, I handed him the envelope, my heart pounding as he took it. I watched as he opened it, his expression shifting from anger to shock as he read the contents. The reality of our situation was sinking in, and I felt a sense of triumph wash over me. I'll have my attorney review this, he said, his voice strained. Do what you need to do, I replied, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. But know this, I'm not backing down. I'm ready to fight for my future. As he stormed out, I felt a rush of exhilaration. I had taken the final step in reclaiming my life, and I was ready to embrace the unknown. The divorce papers were more than just a legal document. They were a symbol of my newfound strength and independence. I was no longer defined by my marriage. I was Margaret Hartford, ready to write my own story. The days following the confrontation with Robert felt surreal, as if I were living in a dream where I had finally awakened to my true self. The divorce papers had been filed, and I was no longer just a name on a corporate document. I was Margaret Hartford, a woman ready to reclaim her life. The weight of my past began to lift, replaced by a sense of freedom I had long yearned for. I spent the first few days after filing for divorce in a haze of activity. I had enrolled in a photography class, something I had always wanted to pursue but had set aside for Robert's ambitions. The thought of picking up a camera again filled me with excitement, a spark of creativity that had been dormant for far too long. I remember the joy I felt when capturing moments through the lens, and I was eager to rediscover that passion. On the first day of class, I walked into the studio, my heart racing with anticipation. The room was filled with natural light, and the scent of fresh paint and new equipment hung in the air. I was greeted by Elena, my instructor, a retired National Geographic photographer with a warm smile and an infectious enthusiasm for her craft. Welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to have you here, she said, her voice filled with encouragement. As the class began, I felt a sense of belonging wash over me. I was surrounded by people who shared my passion, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something that was entirely my own. We spent the day learning about composition, lighting, and the technical aspects of photography, but more importantly, we shared our stories. Each person in the room had their own journey, and I found comfort in the fact that I was not alone in my struggles. Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself in my photography. I explored the city, capturing its beauty through my lens. I found inspiration in the mundane, the way sunlight filtered through the leaves of a tree, the laughter of children playing in the park, the quiet moments of reflection in a bustling cafe. Each click of the shutter felt like a release, a way to express the emotions I had bottled up for so long. As I honed my skills, I also began to explore new opportunities. I reached out to local galleries, sharing my work and seeking feedback. To my surprise, I received positive responses, and soon I was invited to showcase my photographs in a group exhibition. The thought of displaying my work in a gallery filled me with a mix of excitement and anxiety, but I knew I had to seize this opportunity. In the midst of my artistic pursuits, I also focused on my financial independence. I met with David Chin regularly, discussing my investments and planning for my future. He was supportive and encouraging, helping me navigate the complexities of my newfound freedom. "You've done an incredible job, Margaret," he said during one of our meetings. "Your financial documentation is thorough, and you're entitled to significantly more than you realize." With each passing day, I felt more empowered. I was no longer defined by my marriage. I was building a life that reflected my true self. I began to reconnect with friends I had lost touch with over the years, and I found joy in the simple pleasures of life. I attended art shows, explored new restaurants, and even took weekend trips to the coast, capturing the beauty of the ocean through my lens. One evening, as I sat on the beach watching the sunset, I felt a profound sense of peace. The vibrant colors painted across the sky mirrored the transformation I had undergone. I was no longer the woman who had been humiliated and dismissed. I was a woman who had reclaimed her power and was ready to embrace the future. As the weeks turned into months, I prepared for my first exhibition. The opening night arrived, and I stood in the gallery, surrounded by my photographs. Friends, family, and even some of my former colleagues from Sterling Enterprises had come to support me. The room buzzed with excitement, and I felt a sense of pride swell within me. When the doors opened, I was overwhelmed by the response. People admired my work, sharing their thoughts and emotions as they viewed each piece. I engaged in conversations about my journey, about the stories behind the photographs, and I felt a sense of connection with each person who stopped to talk. In that moment, I realized that I had not only found my voice but had also created a community of support and encouragement. I was no longer just Margaret Sterling. I was Margaret Hartford, an artist, a woman who had embraced her passions and was ready to forge her own path. As the night came to a close, I stood in front of my favorite piece, a photograph of a woman standing on a cliff, arms outstretched, embracing the wind. It was a reflection of my own journey, a symbol of the freedom I had fought so hard to reclaim. I smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one filled with possibilities and the promise of new beginnings. The night of my exhibition had finally arrived, and as I stood in the gallery, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The walls were adorned with my photographs, each one a testament to my journey of self-discovery and empowerment. I had poured my heart and soul into capturing the beauty of life, and now it was time to share that vision with the world. As the doors opened and guests began to filter in, I took a moment to breathe deeply, soaking in the atmosphere. The gallery buzzed with energy, filled with friends, family, and even a few former colleagues from Sterling Enterprises. I spotted David Chin across the room, his supportive smile reassuring me that I was not alone in this moment. People began to gather around my photographs, their eyes lighting up as they engaged with the stories behind each image. I moved through the crowd, listening to their reactions and sharing the inspiration behind my work. One woman paused in front of a portrait of a mother and child, her eyes glistening with emotion. "This captures such a beautiful moment," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "It reminds me of my own journey as a mother." I felt a swell of pride as I realized that my work was resonating with others. Each conversation reinforced the idea that I was no longer just a passive observer in my life. I was an active participant, sharing my perspective and connecting with people on a deeper level. As the evening progressed, I found myself standing in front of my favorite piece, a photograph of a woman standing on a cliff, arms outstretched, embracing the wind. It symbolized my own journey, a representation of the freedom I had fought so hard to reclaim. I had captured that moment of liberation, and now it felt like a reflection of my own spirit. Just then, I noticed Robert entering the gallery, his presence sending a ripple of tension through the room. He looked different, older, more worn. I could see the surprise on his face as he took in the scene, the vibrant energy of the exhibition contrasting sharply with the coldness of our last encounter. I felt a mix of emotions, but I stood my ground, refusing to let his presence overshadow my moment. As he approached, I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Margaret," he said, his voice hesitant, "I didn't realize you were doing this well." I took a deep breath, reminding myself of how far I had come. "I've been working hard to build my own life, Robert. This is just the beginning." He nodded, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of regret in his expression. "I'm sorry for how things ended between us," he said, his voice softer now. I didn't appreciate what I had. I met his gaze, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. I appreciate that you're here, but I've moved on. I'm finally living for myself. As he stepped back, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had faced him, not as the woman he had once dismissed, but as a confident individual who had reclaimed her power. The night continued, filled with laughter, conversations, and the clinking of glasses. I felt a sense of belonging that I hadn't experienced in years. I was surrounded by people who valued my work and my journey, and it felt liberating to share my story with them. As the evening drew to a close, I stood in the center of the gallery, taking in the scene around me. The vibrant energy, the connections I had made, and the support I felt from everyone present filled me with gratitude. I had transformed my pain into art, and in doing so, I had found my voice. The exhibition was not just a celebration of my photography, it was a celebration of my journey, a journey of reclaiming my identity, embracing my passions, and stepping into my power. I was no longer defined by my past. I was Margaret Hartford, an artist, a woman ready to embrace the future with open arms. As I looked around at the smiling faces, I knew that this was just the beginning. I was ready to continue my journey, to explore new opportunities, and to create a life that reflected my true self. The exhibition had marked a turning point, and I was excited to see where this new path would lead me.